Hey guys, welcome back. It's raining right now, so you might hear that in the background. We try to put out videos every Monday and Thursday. Sometimes it might not happen, but we try. And if you like what you see, you can hit that subscribe button. Today, Danny, we're gonna be doing like another little chatty thing because I am a big nerd and I like to read. I listened to Michelle Obama's audiobook last month in December, and basically since I read that and listened to it and I really liked it, I was like, okay, I'm gonna read a biography of every single US president because I'm dumb.
It's not dumb.
It's dumb because it's a big time commitment because there's 46 of them now. I'm not gonna read about 45.
For obvious reasons, yeah.
So first, who was the first president, Danny?
The first president was George Washington. I know that one.
So yeah, I read this book. It's called You Never Forget Your First by Alexis Coe. She wrote this book because there's pretty much no female biographers of George Washington. If there are, they write about his wife or like his family, not about him as a person.
Yeah.
And I consider myself a feminist.
As am I.
Oh, okay. So I wanted to read this book that my mom suggested for me from a feminist perspective. So I'm going to tell you about George Washington.
Cool.
So did you know he's remembered as a great military hero?
Yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest things that we're taught in history class is he was like a general in the Revolutionary War. And
he actually lost more battles than he won.
not the most successful.
He lived through so many diseases. It's insane. He had diphtheria at 15, malaria at 17, 21, 30, 39, 52, 66, smallpox at 19, tuberculosis at 19 and 35, dysentery at 23, 33, 35, and 39, tonsillitis at 47, pneumonia at 58, and epiglottitis at 67, which was fatal. I don't really know exactly what it is, but just from the word parts, epiglottis is the flap that closes when it closes on your air pipe when you swallow, so that food doesn't go down the airway.
Yeah.
And itis means inflammation, swelling.
Yeah.
So it was swollen.
So that was okay.
So he had throat problems.
That's a lot of stuff.
He lived through so much. It's crazy.
And especially thinking back then with the medical technology of that time is nowhere near where it is today.
My mom put it succinctly. You either had a lot of diseases that you lived through or you got one and you died.
That's kind of depressing, but it makes you thankful for modern medicine today.
Yeah.
What's the next fun fact?
When he was elected at age 57 for the first term as the first president of the United States of America, he had one tooth.
One
tooth.
Singular tooth?
Yes. You want to know where he got his dentures from?
Where?
He bought his teeth for his dentures from his slaves.
Yikes.
The next fun fact is the men who write about him, usually the biographies, they're strangely obsessed with his masculinity.
Yeah, he is I guess portrayed, at least in my youth history classes, as this manly man, 6'2", 6'3",
yeah.
super big leader for the country.
He was tall for his time, but for some reason biographers are really obsessed with that. Do you want to hear a quote? Okay, so this is from Ron Chernow, I don't know how to pronounce it. He describes Washington as a superb physical specimen with a magnificent physique. When he clenched his jaw, his cheek and jaw muscles seemed to ripple right through his skin. Isn't that weird?
Kind of sounds like he's got the hots for George Washington.
Why would you describe someone?
He's got a crush.
His jaw muscles would ripple through his skin.
Ripple.
And that is a quote from Ron Chernow, so I'm not stealing that, I'm not claiming it. And all of these facts, by the way, I am getting from this biography. Washington's mother is usually portrayed as this very overbearing, hysterical woman in other biographies about him, and she's kind of portrayed as what we would think of as a helicopter parent. Mothers of that time All they wanted was for their children to like live into adulthood. So of course she would kind of be like a helicopter parent. She wants them to like live.
I don't know what the percentage was exactly, but it was a lot higher percentage of like kids dying.
Yeah. Like infant death rate was very high. So it would make sense that she would be overbearing. But she's just portrayed negatively when, if you really think about it, she probably just was like cared for her son. That's not to say that she might not have been like jealous of his life or success or whatever, but
I think it's like it's justified to like care about your child though.
When George Washington was 22, he killed a French ambassador. I know what his name is spelled like, but I don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm not going to try.
I'll put his name right here so y'all can see it.
He killed this French ambassador, and he pretty much single-handedly started the French and Indian War.
Wow.
At age 22.
Dang, that's pretty insane. That's like a 22-year-old. When I was 22, I was just like playing video games and stuff. So this guy's going and starting wars or whatever.
Here's a fun one. George and Martha George would not have met his future wife if he didn't have dysentery.
Wow. Okay. So what's the story behind that?
So he had dysentery and he went home to Virginia to recover from it and to see a doctor. And while he was home, he went to a party where he met Martha.
What a great love story. I had dysentery.
This one is annoying, and you probably would find it annoying too. George Washington liked to give his step-granddaughters dating advice. This is not a quote from George Washington, but this is a quote from this book of how this author paraphrased what George Washington said. Basically, the advice was, don't be a reckless flirt, make sure he's really into you, let him come to you, love fades, and best, but not least. It's easier to love a rich man than a poor man.
Obviously. Jeez. That's like pretty savage. But like not in a good way savage.
But it was like that time's dating advice. We're getting negative now. George Washington often gave people permission to beat his slaves. And sometimes he did it himself because there are accounts from his slaves' family members who would say that George Washington would like slap them.
That's like awful.
Yeah.
It's bad enough to like own slaves.
Here's like another one. So like he had slaves, he owned slaves, so a lot of these are kind of surrounding that. In response to the tax that the British placed on American goods, Washington described them as Americans feeling like slaves to the British, which is really ironic because Washington felt like a slave, which means he felt like he didn't have liberty from the British, while he simultaneously owned slaves.
That's like the most like hypocritical statement.
And this is no excuse at all for George Washington, but that was probably the thinking of many people in that time. But when we talk about Abigail Adams, who was John Adams' wife, you'll see some different points of view. Since that was like super negative, I don't want it to be a totally negative video. Because George Washington did have some accomplishments in his presidency. Okay. So in his first term alone, he oversaw the passage of the Bill of Rights. He appointed federal and Supreme Court judges. Rhode Island, Vermont, and Kentucky joined the Union. He formed a federally regulated army. He helped pass the Naturalization Act, which granted citizenship to people who had been in the country for over 2 years, with the caveat of it was only applied to free white people. Washington, D.C. was built. He kind of like oversaw the plans of Washington, D.C. An official currency was created. We got some consistency throughout the colonies going now. Well, now they're called states. And one of the biggest things that we are not witnessing right now in current history times is Washington established the peaceful transfer of power, which is not happening at this moment. Anyways, another good thing about Washington was he really cared for his stepchildren. I know it's kind of like a stigma, but sometimes it's not like that when you have a blended family. And Washington's stepchildren described him as loving. They felt loved as a father would love them, which is good. Yeah. It's hard for me to like say positive things about people who own slaves. I'm just trying to make this as something that I found interesting about these people.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, but also, like, sad at the same time.
Yeah. He's not the perfect leader that everyone thinks he is.
And someone I know, and if you're watching this video, you'll know who you are, told me that the country has had the right people leading us at the right time when we needed them the most. So we had George Washington when we needed him. We had Lincoln when we needed him.
Mm-hmm.
We had FDR when we needed him.
Yeah.
So, like, these people aren't perfect, but
They
were the right person for the job at the time.
Nice. Excuse me.
So here's a fun fact. George Washington won his first presidential election with 69 electoral votes.
69. We're actual children, by the way.
So Washington believed in religious freedom, which is good.
Yeah.
I wish more people would also believe in religious freedom. Now it's going to be really depressing and really sad. So I'll preface it and say kind of what we've been saying before is that he was not a perfect person and he owned slaves because, like, that was the time he lived in. But, like, we're still not justifying it at all.
Yeah, it's not excusable.
No. So, talking about one of his slaves in his own words, this is a quote from George Washington. He said, "Gives me reason to hope he may, with your good management, sell well, if kept clean and trimmed up a little when offered to sale." And if that doesn't want to make you throw up, I don't know what will.
I was just talking about, like, a human being, like property.
We're getting a little bit more positive, but not completely. In Washington's will, he freed his slaves, but because his slaves were married to his wife's slaves, they had families together, and he did not want to separate the families. So those slaves that he freed could not be freed until either Martha died or she allowed them to be freed. He actually only wound up freeing one person, whose name was William Lee.
So the rest, were they freed once Martha died?
Well, actually, it's really sad. It did not happen like that. The families were broken up and they were divided among George's and Martha's children.
So, like, his will didn't really get fulfilled.
Mm-mm. All right, and lastly, but not leastly, George's last words was, "'Tis well," and he spoke those to Martha, and after George took his final breath, Martha also said, "'Tis well."
Well, that's sweet.
It's also reported, or, like, apparently, according to what I read, she didn't even, like, cry when he died.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that's really
because
strange.
he was like dying for a while, so she might have already come to terms with it. It happened over a few days.
I feel like I would still be, like, in tears if, like, you died.
But famous last words, I guess.
That's the name of a My Chemical Romance song. And I'm not going to play it because I don't want to get copyright claimed.
So those are all of the things that kind of popped out to me about him. So did you, like, learn anything new?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that I learned overall, it's not like a specific fact, but just the idea that George Washington isn't just, like, this perfect first, like, leader of our country. He,
like how we learn in school.
Yeah, he had his own shitty things that he participated in, like slavery. He was part of his time, really. He was just a man in his time, and it doesn't excuse anything he did, but that's just how the world was, how society was.
Yeah,
back then.
it doesn't excuse it, but, like, we need to remember the history so that it doesn't happen again.
Hope y'all enjoyed this little history lesson, in a sense.
Yeah, and I'm currently getting through this one, the second president, obviously. I'm not sure when we would be able to do that video, but it'll come up sometime in the next few months.
Yeah, so make sure you're subscribed.
If you like presidents, I am trying to read through all of them, and so
eventually
you can learn some new facts that you might not have known before.
We'll make a cool little facts video for each president.
Yeah, so this will be like a little series that we do over the course of however long it takes.
Yep. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off. But we'll see you on Thursday with a new video.
Bye.
Peace out.